Dr. Justin Hopkins, licensed clinical psychologist in Washington, D.C., and this is Tim Talks.
Hey, welcome to Tim Talks Season 3, where we're here to put therapy in motion for a third time as we bring you some of the most dynamic and innovative mental health and wellness professionals from around the world. I'm your host, Daniel Brooks, owner and creator of Good Counsel, LLC, where we're here to make healing possible. This is our third and final week. It's been a journey. You know, we went all the way to the west coast of LA where we met with Dr. Empath, and she taught us about side chakra therapy and energy healing. And then just last week, we met with Felicia Wingard, a licensed clinical social worker from right here in Roanoke, Virginia, as she's opening up her new private practice right here in Roanoke, focusing on trauma treatment. And then tonight, I promise not to disappoint. It's our third week, so I wanted to bring it home with a bang with another fellow Hamptonian and Dr. Justin Hopkins. He's a certified, licensed clinical psychologist out of Washington, D.C., who also works in the consulting world in diversity and inclusion. I can't wait to learn more. I'm super excited to have my brother with me. Welcome none other than just Dr. Justin Hopkins. How are we doing, sir?
How's it going? Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited.
Man. I'm super happy. You know, it was like tracking down LeBron James to get you on the show, bro. So you
I hope I didn't make it that hard for you, but I had to make time for my fellow Hamptonian.
I love it, brother. So definitely bring us up to speed. You know, it's funny, we haven't really spoke since Hampton. You were just a little bro, you know, playing with your brother back then. Shout out to E-Hop, by the way. And bring us up to speed since Hampton, man. How you been? What's been going on?
Sure. So after Hampton, I went on. I majored in psychology, and I went straight into my doctoral program for clinical psychology. There, I got my PsyD, and I went to internship at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Philly. I did a postdoctoral fellowship for 2 years at George Washington. I worked at Georgetown Law School in their counseling center for a year and change. And then I opened up my own psychotherapy practice in Washington, D.C. and DuPont Circle. And so it's my psychotherapy practice there. And I pretty much kind of like specialize in, I would call it trauma-informed therapy for people whose identities are on the margins. Wow. So anyone who identifies as, in some way, as being an individual who with a minority identity, right? There are certain experiences that you'll have associated with that identity that are unique to experience and that absolutely inform your mental health. And I like to approach therapy from a culturally informed place. Wow. And to also acknowledge the individual traumas that we all experience, from the small ones that are repeated to the large ones that may be one-off incidents. And I think that kind of valence really works, especially for people who have unique experiences around their identities. Wow. So that's kind of the way that I practice. I mean, I look forward to getting into it more. And, I think for many mental health therapists, right? I really, really enjoy the work. People are fascinating. We're all complex, and we can all learn more about ourselves.
Yeah. As you have to, in previous shows, I talk about how this is a calling. This isn't just something that you can kind of do just because you want to do it. You have to be intentional about the work that we do. And I've been following you for some time now and just love everything you have going on. So first question, why mental health? How did you fall into, I just said it was a calling, but how did you come around to the mental health work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get it a lot, as I'm sure you might as well. I think for me, it really did feel like a calling, right? Like I was in a cliche way, like I was that friend in a lot of my circles where people knew they could come to me and talk, like whatever it was, they knew that I wasn't going to judge them. I was really going to try to understand, try to be a source of support and an ear to them, right? Somebody sound to just talk things out and, and just be a good friend in that way, right? So it kind of came natural, and I found that a lot of my relationships kind of followed that dynamic where people really appreciated being able to talk to me about things. I mean, the other thing is that, and Brooks, you might already know this, is that so my grandfather is a barber in Queens, New York. It's where I'm from, born and raised, Queens, New York. He's had a barber shop in Queens for over 50 years. We celebrated a couple of years back. You know, the barbershop is one of the few places, right, where brothers can come sit down, talk, you know, and relate to one another based on some of their experiences, you know, and I think in any space, right, there's some things that you can talk about, some things that you can't, right? And I noticed both of those things, right? Things that we could talk about a little bit more in the barbershop, and also things that you couldn't talk about at all. Right. But in any event, right, there was something kind of special about that dynamic in the barbershop that just felt so meaningful, you know, and I kind of somehow that always stuck in my mind, how you could come there and you could just talk, you could rap and have a genuine conversation. And I felt like there was just something so moving and meaningful about that. And, you know, tie that with my interest in people, and I took a psychology course in high school, and, you know, I kind of figured that I would go into it further. And, you know, I realized in my community, despite, you know, the space that was offered in the barbershop, we really didn't have any mental health professionals. There's not many of us. There's not many Black men who go into this field, right? And so I know that it's needed. There's a lot that we go through. There's a lot that we experience. And, you know, talking is a powerful thing. So,
yeah, I absolutely love it. It's crazy because I just got back from the barbershop today, you know, getting ready for you. But
I need to go.
When we talk about the barbershop, you're absolutely right. The power of, you know, I call them that they were our first therapists, you know, our barbers. I remember if it wasn't for my barber at Hampton, I probably wouldn't have survived a lot of the stuff I did. Just being able to talk to this older gentleman about relationships, about things I was struggling with. So it's amazing how you made that connection to kind of what you're doing now. So you're a licensed clinical psychologist, right? So what is it? Tell me how that differs from, you know, social work or counseling or psychiatry. What's the difference?
Yeah. Okay, this is a great question. This gets this gets really confusing for a lot of folks, and I think more than ever the lines blur quite a bit, right? You know, so there are a lot of mental health professionals that practice therapy, right? Like you practice therapy, right? There's plenty of clinicians that practice therapy. There's counselors, social workers like yourself, psychologists. There's also psychiatrists. Now, psychiatrists typically practice medicine exclusively. They go to medical school, they get their general training in medicine, they have rotations and other specialties within medicine, right? And then they go on to residency, where they kind of, you know, dive in for several years learning how to be a psychiatrist. So their general med school is about 4 years, where they'll have rotations and other things, and then they'll have another 4 years just in psychiatry. Psychologists focus specifically on therapy and psychological assessment. So when you are, so if you've ever heard of like the Rorschach, right, the ink blot test, like that's an actual projective assessment of personality, which I learned how to administer, score, and utilize in a clinical setting, right? When law enforcement, certain law enforcement departments require that you take a personality assessment, right? A psychologist would administer and interpret those, right? And so my schooling is specifically on the theories and skill sets that underlie psychotherapy. Psychiatrists doesn't get that kind of training in therapy typically. There's some programs that will start to introduce them a little bit into therapy, right? Maybe in residency at some point. But my program, most doctoral programs in psychology are 5 years, you know, and so the first 4 years you're doing, the first year is just schoolwork. the year 2 through 4, it's clinical work and schoolwork. And then year 5 is an internship, which is kind of like the residency version of psychology school, where I worked full time. So really the biggest difference for a psychologist is that from all of the rest, because again, social worker counselors, they can do psychotherapy. So psychologists are trained in psychotherapy as well as psychological assessment. And on top of that, there are about 7 states in the nation where psychologists are getting prescription privileges. So it just really depends on the state where you can kind of practice psychopharmacology with additional training. Because what we know is that like the gold standard of treatment is medicine and therapy. And it's hard when you're getting therapy from one person and medicine from another. You have to make sure you're communicating. I always speak to the psychiatrists that are working with my patients to make sure that we're on the same page with understanding what's going on with the person, right? And so there's kind of like gaps in the field that I think we're all kind of like trying to manage and work our way through. And it's just best that when you're working with someone, right, to be in communication with them. So you guys can plan together.
Yeah, because it's already very few of us, as you talked about, Black males in the mental health arena as it is. And now I can imagine it's even fewer in the psychology realm, and especially as fully licensed clinical psychologists, I can imagine it's even fewer.
Yeah. I have a short list of Black male psychologists in DC because I get, requests often. They're like, is there someone else who's also a black man that can do the kind of work that you do? Because I'm only one person, right? I can't work with everyone who wants to work with a Black male psychologist. But there's more of us that's needed, and our community in particular, I think, deserves to heal from all the things that we endure.
Wow, you said it. You hit the head. That's where everything that counsel does is making healing possible. Because, like you said, we get overrun with, the I need a Black male, or I want my child, I want this individual. Is there any, Black male professionals that they can work with? So, that's definitely my goal, and I hope by individuals seeing us as 2 Black males that it can spark someone to say, hey, let me go into this field and let me kind of add to the diversity because it's needed. And so you talked a little bit about doing some of your trauma work with early in your career. And I know trauma is something you talked about also. So tell me, a little bit about, the work that you do with trauma and about, your I guess connection to wanting to kind of work within the trauma.
One of the things that I really appreciate about my education is how it really reframed my understanding of trauma, what trauma actually is, right? I think we've come pretty far from the days of thinking that trauma is only what happens to veterans, right? Combat trauma, and we're going further beyond that and recognizing trauma isn't just a single incident, right? Like I kind of have this understanding that, or I operate from the understanding that all therapy to some degree is trauma work, because there are certain experiences that we have in our life that are painful, that influence who we are and our approach to relationships, our self-concept, and the way that we view the world, right? Whether those experiences be subtle or explicit, right? There are experiences that we all have that leave an imprint on how we show up in the world. And so to me, trauma work is really just about kind of understanding what these experiences are that leave a mark on us, that influence us, that we take certain lessons from, that shape who we are, that we kind of center our coping style, like our primary defense mechanisms are kind of organized around some of these experiences or the lessons that we learn from these experiences. And so that's kind of the lens that I have when it comes to therapy. It's just finding out how we've organized ourselves and our coping strategies, the things that we want to avoid, our underlying fears that we're not necessarily aware of but are operating in the background, right? So that's that's my understanding of trauma.
Yeah.
And that applies again to the one-off incidents as well as these repeated emotional experiences as well.
Because it's those small traumas that hold us back. I truly feel from
yes, absolutely
everything we were designed to kind of walk into, you know, that kind of keeps our fears, so to speak. I know with me, and just going through my own therapy over the past few years, recognizing how my childhood trauma, those small traumas, and was that continuous tape I was playing in my head. And it made me feel as if I was inadequate. I wasn't good enough. I was this imposter, so to speak. And then once I was able to work through that, then I was able to really walk into everything that I'm destined to do. So I always tell people that, you know, severing that connection from allowing that trauma to hold you back can be one of the most beautiful things that can happen in your life.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, and I think we tend to replay certain patterns, you know, in our lives that particularly if we're not aware of it and we don't acknowledge. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge, right? And for a lot of us too, you know, particularly for you know, our minority communities, right? I know for me, like growing up in the Black community, right, it's always expected that you would just be resilient, like, because, you know, you have to be twice as good to get half as far. Like, you just gotta like tough it out and move forward. And so we might turn a blind eye to some of these things that kind of get in our own way at times, you know, ways in which we've learned to cope that may have worked at an earlier part in life that actually end up holding us back in adulthood, you know. So having seen that kind of play out with some people that I've worked with, see that playing out with people that I know personally, it's a remarkable thing to gain that insight and learn how to work through and develop new patterns. The
resiliency process. And you brought it up. Let's kind of go there. Tell me about like the problem or the unintended consequences of Black resiliency, or kind of come from the effects of it.
Right. I really enjoy talking about this because it's one of those like subtle, like really subtle, like insidious things that we don't necessarily stop and take in. That's always present for us. And that's a part of our reality, you know, living as a Black person in a society. And so, and I said it just a moment ago, right? Like this idea of Black resilience, right? It's kind of like, it's kind of doublespeak in a way, because Black is synonymous with resilience, right? Like if you are Black, you just have to be resilient, right? Like you just kind of push through it, right? That's what it means to be Black in a lot of instances, that you have certain experiences, right, that are going to be troubling and challenging, but that you work your way through it anyway. Like we know that racism exists. We know that there will be challenges that are unfair, obstacles that other people don't have to deal with, but yet and still, you know, we have certain expectations of ourselves. Our community depends on us in certain ways. The generations before us that have sacrificed certain things depend on us to move the needle forward, right? Like regardless of the expectations, we're still, regardless of the obstacles we face, we're still expected to exceed, excel, thrive, right? And we expect that of ourselves as well. Yes, you have to be twice as good to get half as far, but get more than half as far, right? Be twice as good, right? That's kind of the reality that we just
get the actual result from having to be twice as good. Get the, you know, don't just get half as far. Go ahead and get further.
Definitely. Right. And so because we just kind of accept that, I think, so understood, right, that we have to be twice as good to get half as far, sometimes we don't recognize the amount of pressure and unfairness that goes into that.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, what can happen is that, you know, when people don't get the kind of outcome or the results that they would like in a particular job, you know, they're not getting the kind of evaluation at work that they would like to get, or maybe they aren't on track to be promoted the way they would like to be, right? Because we know we have to be twice as good, right? to get half as far. That's what we're used to, right? Instead of acknowledging the unfairness that one might experience in that situation, you're just like, dang, I should have did better. Dang, like I can't. I misspelled this word on a document. Like I all these mistakes that are human that maybe other people make, you're not allowed to make. And so you may self-criticize as a way to kind of get through that, to say, I can still control this, I can still move forward. And you may, and you can, yet also, right, we kind of end up taking on more challenge than is than can be healthy sometimes. We have that critical voice in our minds that we just kind of accept that we have to be resilient and push through is the only thing you can do. And the reality is we're not more resilient than anybody else, right? We're human like everyone else. As quiet as it's kept, right? Like Black people are humans, we're just human. We're not more resilient than anyone. Our bags are just heavier. We've had to carry more. And we don't always recognize the weight, right? Because that's the weight that we know.
Wow.
In therapy, the way that this shows up is that a lot of the times we have difficulty acknowledging what we feel, because we're like, I mean, somebody else had it harder. So-and-so had it more difficult than me. Well, I don't really feel like I should be
wow. You're my
I don't feel like I should be as hurt by this, or this shouldn't be making me so anxious as it is, right? We tell ourselves we shouldn't feel what we actually do feel, because we have that internal expectation to just be resilient and push through. So it's actually quite dehumanizing, and it can kind of get in our way of healing, because we're ashamed of struggling. We're ashamed of having certain feelings, and ashamed that we're impacted by things like people are sometimes, because the bar is just different for us.
Which leads to even more burnout, especially for those of us who use our resiliency to climb the corporate ladder, so to speak, who try to do everything in spite of everything we've kind of gone through. And then we find ourselves never really, which was me, never really dealing with all of that. And then it has to come out at some point, right? So I found
right.
in so many situations, in good positions, but I was so afraid to mess up, and I put myself on this pedestal. On top of, being the only Black male in a lot of the fields I worked in, a lot of the so I put myself on this pedestal that was impossible to maintain, right? But I felt like you said, I have to stay here. People had it harder than me. People had to fight so hard for me to get here. And what I realized is that that's not good for longevity. So, wow.
Right, you're not allowed to make any mistakes, right? And I know you played ball, right? And right, there's that stat, right? Black quarterbacks are benched twice as often, twice as fast as white quarterbacks, and there's all this research to show, regardless of their statistics, regardless of their quarterback rating, right? And the team even suffers more, right? The team suffers more, but they're still benched quicker, right? So you kind of have in the back of your mind, like, you can't make as many mistakes. And while that is the reality that we face, we have to be able to forgive ourselves for making mistakes, which means to be human, right? And kind of lean into our humanity and give ourselves that grace when the world is not going to give it to us.
Wow, I needed to hear that. Because today has definitely been one of those days for me where, I forgot to set my alarm. I pride myself in these little things, of I'm always going to be on time. I'm always going to try to do everything right. And this is even with my own business. So I forgot to set my alarm. So all day I've been working from behind. And I remember one of my friends who's also an entrepreneur. He said, "Is everything okay?" Because I responded in not a normal way like myself. And say was, I'm behind. He texts back, "Give yourself some grace," and that's so hard to do for whatever reason. So just hearing you say that, it just confirms even more that that's what we need to do.
It's so much easier to tell somebody else than to receive it for yourself.
Yeah.
So don't be fooled like I'm an expert at giving myself grace. This is hard. This is to me, like, this is where our lifelong work lies in the relationship that we have with ourselves. That's the hard stuff. That is the hardest part. Right? You can help other people so much easier than we are able to help ourselves, right? It's our lifelong work to continue to work on that relationship with ourselves in a way that allows us to grow, and you can't grow if you don't have that space to mess up. The world doesn't really afford that space for us, so we've got to make sure that we make it.
Most definitely, being okay with it. So so you also do diversity and inclusion consulting, right? Yep. And just while we're still talking, about the culture and the Black experience, I just want to kind of get into that, because it appears that diversity and inclusion has unfortunately become a hot topic. It's almost like that new fad right now, which is super unfortunate, but everything is diversity and inclusion workshops and things of that nature. Tell me first a little bit about the work you do in that space, and then also, why does it seem like Black people just now started to have problems? And why does it seem like that's where everyone's kind of like, hey, I've been here the whole time almost, right?
Yeah, it's strange, right? And it's strange in a normal way, I guess, in a normative way, because we kind of have these awakenings like every couple of decades or so, and I'm not that old, but you can read about them, that we have these awakenings. And to me, I think what happens is so this is, I'll say, this is kind of how my trauma work and the consultation work kind of overlaps, right? The way that I kind of understand what's happening right now, this awakening that we're having to some of the issues that we're dealing with, is that America has a wound that we've never fully addressed, right? So there's a societal trauma that was slavery, that dehumanized Black folks, and it created and gave white folks this idea of their supremacy, which is also based on a lie, right? So their identity isn't on solid ground either, because of what white supremacy offers to white people, and they don't have to be aware of it. That's the privilege, right? You don't have to be aware of all the other things because you have because the society is tilt toward your direction, and because we've never. The thing about trauma is there's this working at the Veterans Hospital, right? There are these studies that were done to show who develops PTSD, right? So everyone after a traumatic event has some signs of a reaction to a trauma, right? There's this thing called acute stress disorder, which is that initial reaction to a trauma. In the first 6 months, you have a reaction to a trauma. It's acute stress disorder. It lasts longer than 6 months. It's PTSD. So everyone has some sort of acute stress response to a trauma. Everyone does. But then there are people who develop PTSD. The difference between those who develop PTSD and those who don't is that those who develop PTSD avoided any recollection of the trauma.
Wow.
Meaning you avoid any signs, you try to avoid thinking about it, you don't talk about it, you don't acknowledge it really. And so what happens is you keep having these new experiences where you are confronted by the reality of what happened to you, right? That's like America right now, right? We really acknowledge the original sin of slavery. So every now and then we have a re-experiencing, a reawakening. We encounter the trauma in a way that's unignorable. And then we're like, oh my goodness, we're traumatized as a society and we have some really big issues. And then we don't address the situation really. And then we kind of continue to re-experience it, right? And that, the George Floyd incident is akin to a nightmare for someone with PTSD, right? You're having another experience of the original trauma, right? So when it comes to consulting work, I try to kind of go in from the ground floor of what our ideologies are, our prevailing ideologies, which are patriarchy, racism, capitalism. Recognize that as ideologies, anyone can support them. This is the norm that we have, right? These are the prevailing ideologies of our society. So if we're going to be diverse, if we're going to be inclusive, if we're going to really move the needle forward towards equality, when I'm working with corporations or organizations and talking about these issues, we have to acknowledge the ways in which we kind of breathe in the air of these prevailing ideologies. Like, we don't necessarily know what it is, right? We don't see the molecules of what we're breathing in, but we do breathe, right? It is similar to how these ideologies function. There are all these subtle ways which we don't always see, especially if you're a person of privilege, that are enacting, that are happening, right, on a daily basis. So it's basically working with organizations to strengthen their diversity platforms, to help them do the internal work so they can be better at better humans to their fellow person, right? And recognize their own biases and blind spots and actually heal from the trauma that we haven't healed from as a society.
Most definitely. The process of recognizing it and actually, knowing that we need to make this change, or we need to enact this new policy or process within our organization. Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah. Switching a little bit, back to the mental health and what you do within your practice, even more psychodynamic therapy. I know that's just something else you do. Look at you smiling. You like that. Tell me about psychodynamic therapy.
Yes, yeah. Well, one, it does get a bad rap. I just want to say that. I think in the world of therapy, sometimes psychodynamic therapy is looked at as a relic of the past.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah, you've heard of that.
Yeah.
I'm reclaiming it, Brooks. I'm reclaiming it.
I love it. I'm super excited. I love it.
Essentially, psychodynamic therapy is the original talk therapy, as you know. It was. It's really about the fact that humans are incredibly complex. The human mind is incredibly complex. There are things that we know about ourselves, and there are things that we don't know about ourselves. Mm-hmm. In other words, we have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. And the vast majority of our mind is unconscious. Yeah. The vast majority of the things that influence our behaviors, thoughts, feelings, desires, preferences, motivations are actually not consciously known to us. Yeah. Right? We kind of bring. We'd like to know that we are in control. We'd like to think that we're in control, but we are actually. There's actually a lot that we don't know that influences who we are. Right? The human brain takes in millions and millions of bits of information over the course of a second. But then when we're making a decision, we're often only conscious of like a handful of those bits of information, right? All of the rest of that stuff is still taken in, right? And still influences us on some way that we're not necessarily aware of. Yeah. So what psychodynamic therapy is about really is it's helping people to grow increasingly aware of all of the parts of them, the parts that they're not, the parts that they haven't been able to recognize, the parts that they couldn't recognize for one reason or another. For example, a child who grows up in a household where anger is taboo, right? You're not allowed to be angry at your parents. So it's bad. Like, that's a feeling that you can't have, right? And we're not in charge of our feelings. If you feel angry, what's going to happen, right? You learn to do something with that emotion to not allow it to be a part of your conscious experience, or you may feel anxious when you feel angry, right? Like, instead of being able to voice it in a way that's healthy.
Like that person, when you feel angry, like is this?
Yeah, you feel shame. Right. And, there's nothing wrong with anger. There's nothing wrong with any emotion when used in a way that is appropriate, and considerate of yourself and others. Right. We're just human. Right. We have emotions. We don't get to choose what we feel. We get to choose if we're aware of how we express it. Right. Wow. So there's all these little things that are, those subtle experiences of trauma that are a part of who we are. And can help someone to kind of become increasingly aware of some of their habits and dynamics so that they can be more autonomous and more informed when they're making decisions, how they approach relationships, how they think about themselves within the world, right? It's lofty. It has some lofty goals, I think, and it's helping to kind of rewire your natural patterns and habits. And there are even studies that show that after like long-term psychodynamic therapy can rewire some of your neuronal connections, and or you develop other neuronal connections from the experience of being in that kind of therapy.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's the new like kind of neuroscience research. About months to years of therapy. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, because with Tim Talks, it was because everyone kind of have always had the idea that therapy was sitting on a couch, kind of just laid back, kind of talking about those things. So even hearing these benefits, is conducive to kind of what we're doing. Is that even with all of these innovative styles of therapy, there's still so much benefit in psychodynamic therapy and in creating, reconnecting those connections in your brain to getting you back to where you need to be. Wow.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
So within, what you do, just specifically within your practice, I know you work with different genres of people, from racial issues, the LGBTQ community, and oppression and things of that nature. Tell us about, what type of specific issues do you deal with, and what a session would look like kind of with you. I know we went over just a little bit, but just kind of tie all of that into what Dr. Hop does.
So this is where psychodynamic therapy can kind of get a bad rap, in that it's a little hard to explain, and it may not. It's hard to explain in that because every session looks a little bit different. But I can tell you for myself, like what I try to do, and that's one, try to cultivate a space where someone can say anything and everything.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Like to speak in the most uncensored fashion possible. Right. Wow. And if you're of a minority identity and fitting into the parameters of this society, right, whether it be like you mentioned, corporate America, like I'm sure you know quite well, there's a version of you that you absolutely cannot be.
Yeah, I couldn't wear this hat and this shirt until I made my own. So I definitely know.
You had to create that space for yourself, right?
You have to, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, right. And so, we have a lot of experiences like that where we can't be our full selves, from childhood through adulthood. And it's, it's about kind of exploring these parts of you that are present, but may not necessarily be a part of what you know yourself to be, or they may show up in ways that are unhealthy or challenging. I am going to answer your question though. The only other thing I wanted to add is that, like, from the approach that I take, right? Like, so for example, let's say depression, for example, depression, right? Often, like, the symptoms themselves are signs of larger underlying processes, right? It's kind of like the symptom. One way to understand it, this is one psychodynamic way, there's other ways, but one way to understand it is that you unconsciously make a compromise between two completely opposite desires, or two competing impossible demands. Wow. And that compromise is depression. For example, right, like if you grew up with a parent that was jealous or envious and rageful towards you, right? Or, angry at you often, right? That kind of competed with you even, right? And you were someone who, you grew up and you were actually really skilled academically, got a really great job, right? And then this new promotion comes, right? There's a part of you, there's that need to self-actualize and succeed and grow and be successful. But there's also that need to have love from a parent. And you know that if you like take that job, your relationship with your parent may suffer, right? And so instead of kind of wrestling with all of the abuse, disappointment, challenge of what that relationship is with your parents, you kind of compromise, you don't accept the promotion. So you stay in this place where you're kind of happy with your job, but you know you're not living up to your potential.
Yeah.
Right. Something's happening there. Right. And so then you end up depressed. So you kind of meet both demands, like, but not really. And you end up unsatisfied. Right. So for me, like, I'm listening for and watching for the person's emotional experience and trying to respond to it. When they take a deep breath, put some words to that. What does that mean? What is that breath what is that sigh meaning? Your respiratory system is responding to something that you're feeling in the moment. And you got to put some words to it, because when you put some words to it, you can organize things and you can move through it. Right. But a lot of the things that we experience, we don't verbalize because it's unconscious. We may not even know it's there. Yeah. So I'm trying to listen to and trace the feelings that you have, the things that are not said, that, you know, there's like a gap in something you're saying. I just really, really try as much as I can to understand you, to listen to what you're saying, to listen to your body language, and get to know you as a person and an individual.
Wow. I envy your style of therapy, because when I first started in the field, or thought I was going to go into psychology, because fun fact, I don't think people know this, is when I went to Hampton as a computer science major, right, and played football. Mm-hmm. I hate math. I don't know why I thought that I wasn't going to have to do anything with math. I remember I took one psychology class in high school. Never knew what it was. Kind of like the same thing you said, was everybody liked to talk to me. So I go to my advisor and I said, what is the easiest subject I can do, or easiest major to have and play football? She told me psychology. So I got into this world, and all I ever knew was the style of therapy that you do. So I always wanted to be able to interpret and kind of analyze and kind of guide people on what they do. And as I walked into this field, I realized that's not my style, but that's okay. But I love just you even being able to address, what does that sigh mean? What does that breath mean? Tell me more. Where are you feeling right now? And that's something that I just love about what you do. And people need that style of therapy to be able to challenge those competing thoughts.
Yeah, and those hidden things about ourselves that interrupt our lives.
Yeah. Absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. So as we come to a close, this is just free and amazing. I always ask in every interview is, tell me, what is your hope for the future of your practice and what you do specifically, and the hope of the future of mental health as a whole?
Wow, this is a good question. Yeah. You ask some good questions, man. Like, you should have like a show. You
all your colleagues too.
I mean, this is your show. You're doing what you should be doing. You know what I mean? That's really what I mean. It's like you're on the mark here. Oh boy. You know, ideally, I want to bring, I want to continue to destigmatize psychodynamic therapy and decode it. I want to make it accessible. If you ever read a psychoanalytic, like, academic journal, it is like deciphering an encyclopedia in Latin, you know? And it really frustrates me, right? Academics can do that sometimes. We got to make things accessible. You know, and I want to make it more accessible because I think it can be really liberating. So I want to continue to bring psychodynamic therapy to my communities. And I'd like my practice to grow where I have other people working with me to do that kind of good work. Wow, I absolutely love it. You're doing it, and you know the whole purpose of Tim Talks is, like I say, is to put therapy in motion, because we're all about innovation. We want the future. Everything else is updating daily. Our computers, our cell phones, our cars, everything gets an update. But
our mind is updating, but the therapy that helps us to deal with it and the mental health practices that help us, that support us, they're not updating as fast. So to have you on. Anything you want to leave us with in closing?
I just appreciate this, man. I think this is absolutely dope.
Wow.
I love what you're doing, man. I told you before, I love the logo. I love the platform. And I look forward to seeing this grow. I really do.
I really appreciate that. Thank you again. And much love to you, brother. Peace.
Likewise.
Yes, so again, that ends season 3. Dr. Hop, my brother, he's phenomenal. He's doing amazing things. Be sure to look him up, go to his website, check him out. It's been down at the bottom throughout the show. I can't believe we're at end of another season. We had 3 amazing, dynamic, phenomenal individuals. And as you can see, Tim Talks is growing, but it's all through faith, and it's all through just my goal and Good Counsel's goal of reaching that one individual who will see a form of therapy or a form of healing, and they'll reach out and try it, because we're going through so much. Right now, we're surviving COVID together. We're surviving social injustice, social discrimination. We're surviving all of these, active pandemics and active issues that healing. We have to be intentional about it. We have to choose a process. So we want to make sure that we put therapy in motion, bring it to your living room, and bring you as many people that you can see that can impact you in your healing process. Again, everything we do is led by faith, and everything that we do is to make healing possible. Can't wait to next season. Don't know who we're going to bring or where we're going to be or who we're going to interview, but be on the lookout. And don't forget these great shirts. The Making Healing Possible shirts. The link will be down at the bottom for you to get yours. Remember, it's support local. It's Roanoke Strong. Get your shirt, as half of the proceeds go to Good Counseling itself. Thank you guys. It's been a great season. Peace.
It's Tim Talks.